My name is Elena Voss. At 39 years old, I learned that a house can be stolen right under your nose while you're 10,000 miles away, protecting the very country that prints the deeds. I had spent 12 long years saving for one single dream, a beautiful lakeside home for my parents, Robert and Margaret, who had just celebrated 50 years of marriage. They had been poor most of their lives, but they had loved fiercely and quietly. I closed on the property from a military base overseas, never even stepping foot inside before signing the papers. The plan was simple and beautiful. Fly home, hand my mother the keys on their golden anniversary, and watch her stand on that wide wooden deck overlooking the water, close her eyes, and finally breathe easy. But when my boats hit the gravel driveway that warm afternoon, nothing went according to plan. My mother, 71 years old, was sitting on the front porch steps in her favorite pale blue cardigan, crying silently with one hand pressed over her mouth. My father sat beside her, his hands trembling worse than his arthritis had ever caused, two worn suitcases resting between his feet like they were already being sent away. And then I heard her, my mother-in-law, Diane, pointing directly at my mother and screaming loud enough for the entire cove to hear. "This is our house now, get out." 3 unfamiliar luxury cars filled the driveway. Strangers were laughing on the deck. A small professional sign had been staked in my mother's flower bed that read, "Guest Parking." The brass wind chime my father had carefully hung for their anniversary, the one that was supposed to sing with the lake breeze, was gone. The hook was empty. I set my heavy duffel bag down on the porch boards slowly. The silence that followed my arrival was heavy. The uniform I was still wearing did most of the talking before I even opened my mouth. Diane returned, wineglass in hand, at 2 in the afternoon, and her face changed when she finally recognized me. "Elena," she said, the name sounding more like a problem than a greeting. "Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary women face impossible family betrayals and respond with steady strength instead of raised voices. If you've ever been treated like a guest in your own life, or had your kindness thrown back in your face by the people who were supposed to love you most, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and let me know you're here with me. And if this story sounds familiar already, type the word boundaries right now. I see you." Because what happened next? The way my husband's family had moved into the home I bought with 12 years of deployment pay, turned it into their personal lakeside resort, and tried to push my parents out like unwanted luggage, changed everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and what it really means to protect what's yours. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I simply stood there in the afternoon light, feeling the weight of every year I had carried everyone else's problems, and I made myself a quiet promise. This time I wasn't going to fix it for them. This time they were going to learn exactly who they were dealing with. My parents married in 1976 with almost nothing but a borrowed pickup truck and a whole lot of love. Dad worked as a mechanic in a small town outside of Duluth, Minnesota, fixing tractors and old farm equipment under the open sky. Mom cleaned houses for wealthy summer residents who came up to the lakes. Our entire childhood smelled like pine cleaner and fresh-baked bread, the only 2 luxuries she allowed herself to give us. We never had much, but we had each other. There were no extravagant vacations, no fancy toys. But every summer when money was tightest, Mom would pack a simple picnic and we'd drive to Lake Superior. She'd find a quiet spot on the rocks, close her eyes, and listen to the water. I was only 8 the first time I heard her whisper, one day we'll wake up to this sound every morning." That sentence stayed with me like a promise I made to myself. I joined the military straight out of high school on an ROTC scholarship because it was the only door that opened wide enough for a girl like me. I became a logistics officer, then a captain, and eventually a major. I learned how to move entire battalions across continents without losing my cool. I learned how to stretch every dollar. And while I was deployed, sometimes for 9 months at a time, I saved with a kind of quiet desperation. Deployment pay, hazard pay, every bonus, and a small inheritance from my grandmother. 12 years of saying no to myself, so my parents could finally say yes to the life they deserved. I wanted them to have a home with a wide deck overlooking the water, a kitchen big enough for Mom to bake without feeling guilty, and a small workshop out back where Dad could tinker with his wood projects without anyone telling him he was in the way. I picked the property carefully, a charming 4-bedroom cedar home on a private cove in northern Minnesota, $680,000. The deed was in my name only. I signed everything from a folding table in a desert tent, halfway across the world. During our last video call before I flew home, Mom had asked me gently if I was sure I could afford it. I told her the truth. I had been planning this moment for over a decade. Kyle, my husband of 8 years, had even offered to help get the house ready while I finished my final tour. "Don't worry, babe, I'll handle the details," he said. For once, I let myself believe him. Looking back now, that should have been my first warning sign. But hope has a way of softening sharp edges. If you've ever carried your family's dreams on your shoulders while everyone else assumed you'd always be the strong one, you already understand how heavy that weight can feel. Type "I see you" if that's been your story too. Because the little girl who once watched her mother close her eyes by the lake never imagined that the home she fought so hard to give her parents would be taken over by the very people who were supposed to celebrate with us. But that's exactly what happened the moment my rental car turned onto that familiar gravel drive. Those 12 years weren't just about saving money. They were about proving to myself that I could build something lasting from nothing. Every time I landed in a new desert base, I would open a spreadsheet on my laptop and update the numbers. I turned down nice hotels during leave, cooked my own meals, and skipped every luxury I could. My soldiers used to tease me about being the most disciplined person they'd ever met. What they didn't know was that discipline was my love language to my parents. I chose the Lakeside house after months of careful research. It wasn't the biggest or the flashiest, but it was perfect. Tall windows facing the water, a stone fireplace Mom always dreamed of, and a gentle slope down to a small private dock where Dad could sit with his fishing rod. I even had the realtor send me photos of the kitchen so I could picture Mom rolling out her famous cinnamon rolls on that big island. The day I wired the money, my hands were shaking. Not from doubt, from pure hope. I imagined pulling up on their anniversary with the keys in my pocket, watching Dad's eyes light up when he saw the little workshop I had already stocked with new tools. I wanted them to finally feel like they had arrived, that all the years of scraping by had led to this quiet victory. Kyle knew about the purchase, of course. He had watched me save for years. At first, he seemed supportive. He even sent me pictures of paint swatches and joked about our retirement home. But as the closing date got closer, his messages became shorter. He said he was busy with his contracting business. He promised he would oversee the final cleaning and setup. "Trust me," he texted. "I've got this." I wanted to trust him. After 8 years of marriage, I still hoped we were building something real together. But deep down, something felt slightly off, like a radio station that wasn't quite clear. The utility bills started climbing even before the house was officially mine. When I asked about it during a choppy video call, he brushed it off. "Just testing the heating system, babe. Don't worry." I should have pressed harder, but I was exhausted from back-to-back deployments, and the dream felt so close I could almost touch it, so I let it go. I told myself that once I was home, everything would fall into place. If you've ever ignored small red flags because the bigger picture looks so beautiful, I want you to know you're not alone. We've all done it. The heart wants what it wants, especially when it's trying to heal the past. The flight home felt endless. I kept touching the keys in my breast pocket like a lucky charm. I rehearsed the moment in my head 100 times, pulling my parents into a hug, walking Mom straight to the deck, and finally letting her close her eyes to the sound of the water, this time for good. When the plane touched down in Minneapolis, I was still smiling. I rented a car, changed into my uniform because I knew Dad loved seeing me in it, and started the 3-hour drive north. The trees got taller, the air smelled cleaner, and my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I had no idea that the home I had poured my life into was already being lived in by people who never earned it. and that the man I married had helped make it possible. Kyle and I had been married for 8 years. We met when I was stationed near his hometown. He was charming, confident, and ran his own small contracting business, or at least that's what I believed at the time. In the beginning, he seemed proud of my career. He liked telling people his wife was a major, but over time I noticed the subtle shifts, the way his pride slowly turned into quiet resentment whenever my rank or pay came up in conversation. He hated being reminded that I out-earned him. He hated that my deployments took me away for long stretches. And most of all, he hated that I was the one who could make big things happen, like buying a dream home for my parents without needing his financial help. Still, I loved him, or at least I loved the version of him I had married. When he offered to handle the house details while I finished my tour, I felt relieved. It was the first time in years he had stepped up without me asking. I even thanked him on our last call before I flew home. What I didn't know was that during those final 2 months, while my connection was spotty, and I was wrapping up mission after mission, Kyle's contracting business had been quietly collapsing. He had taken out loans, maxed out cards, and was slowly drowning, and the beautiful lakeside house I bought became his life raft, without my permission. The utility bills kept climbing: water, electricity, even the garbage service. When I asked Kyle during a bad connection, he said it was just testing the systems and getting everything perfect for your parents. I asked him to send me the login for the accounts. He said he would. He never did. My parents mentioned in passing that Diane and some of Kyle's relatives had been spending a lot of time at the new house, helping get it ready. Mom is too kind to complain, so when she says something more than once, it means something. I made a mental note, but I was stuck on base and couldn't do much from overseas. I even started the paperwork to add my parents to the property records as authorized residents. The base legal office helped me with the forms, but everything required signatures and in-person steps I couldn't complete from abroad. I told myself I'd fix it the moment I got home. Looking back, those were all quiet warning signs blinking in the dark, but I was so focused on the finish line, on giving my parents the one thing they had never had, that I ignored them. If you've ever been the reliable one in your family, the person everyone calls when things go wrong, you know how easy it is to become blind to the people taking advantage of that reliability. I had trained myself for years to carry heavy loads without complaint. I thought that strength was my superpower. I had no idea it had also become my blind spot. As I drove those final miles toward the lake, windows down, breathing in the pine air, I still believed in the version of my life where Kyle and I were a team. Where family meant support instead of competition. I touched the keys in my pocket again and smiled. I was wrong. The road curved through the tall pines, and then the lake opened up on my left, wide, calm, and sparkling under the afternoon sun. My chest tightened with emotion. This was it. 12 years of sacrifice coming to life in one perfect moment. I turned onto the long gravel driveway, heart pounding with anticipation, but the moment my tires hit the stones, my foot slipped off the gas. 3 cars I didn't recognize were parked in front of the house. A neatly printed guest parking sign was stuck in Mom's carefully planted flower bed. The beautiful brass wind chime Dad had bought with his own money was missing from the porch hook. And there, on the steps, sat my parents like unwanted visitors. Mom was crying quietly. Dad looked smaller than I had ever seen him, his hands shaking as he tried to hold on to his suitcase. Before I could even get out of the car, the screen door flew open and Diane stepped out, my mother-in-law, dressed like she owned the place, wine glass in hand. She pointed straight at my mother and raised her voice loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "This is our house now, get out." The words hit me like a slap. My mother flinched. My father tried to stand but couldn't. Something inside me, the calm, disciplined soldier I had trained to be, took over. I slowly set my duffel bag down on the porch boards and let the silence do the heavy lifting. Diane turned, irritation on her face, until she saw me in uniform. Her expression shifted from annoyance to surprise, then to something closer to panic. "Elena," she said, the name falling flat between us. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked past her, pushed open the screen door, and stepped inside the house I had bought and never seen. What I found stopped me cold. The once warm living room had been turned into a check-in area with a folding table, a guest book, and a laminated sign that read, "Check in at 3 p.m." Small brass numbers had been screwed onto the bedroom doors like a boutique hotel. The air smelled like bleach and artificial lemon cleaner instead of the home I had imagined. Kyle appeared from the hallway, his face going pale the second he saw me. "Elena, you're early," he stammered. I looked at the numbers on the doors. I looked at the guest book. I looked at my husband, who offered no explanation. "You turned it into a rental," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. The look that passed between Kyle and his brother, who had just walked in carrying towels like a bellhop, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was betrayal. I turned around, walked back to the porch, and knelt in front of my father. "Dad," I said softly, "we're going to get you and Mom a clean room with a real bed tonight, I promise." I carried their suitcases to the rental car myself. Diane stood frozen on the porch, finally realizing the woman in uniform was the actual owner of the house she had claimed. As I drove my parents away from the home I had bought for them, my hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was already shifting into mission mode. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I started making a list. I got my parents settled in a quiet lakeside motel just 15 minutes up the road. Real beds, clean sheets, and a view of the water. Mom kept saying she didn't understand. They had arrived on the planned date with their belongings, excited to start their new chapter. Kyle's brother had met them with a smile and said there was a little scheduling overlap and asked if they wouldn't mind staying in the boathouse for just a few days. My parents, who had never wanted to be a burden to anyone in their lives, agreed. Days turned into weeks. No one delved them back to the main house. Diane told Mom not to use the big kitchen because it might confuse the guests. My gentle mother, who had spent decades cleaning other people's homes, was now being told to stay out of the kitchen in the house her daughter had bought for her. The worst part was what they did to Dad. He had hung those brass wind chimes himself, hands shaking from arthritis, because he remembered how much loved the sound of water. 3 days later, someone told him a guest had complained about the noise. So my 74-year-old father climbed onto a chair, took the chimes down with trembling hands, wrapped them carefully in a dish towel, and put them away so he wouldn't bother anyone. When Mom told me that story in the motel room, something inside me shifted from sadness to cold clarity. I went back to the house that evening when the guests were out. The place was quiet, and I could finally see everything clearly. They had turned my parents' dream home into a full-blown luxury rental. High-end linens, staged photos, professional listing on a major booking platform. The master bedroom, the one I had chosen specifically for my parents, was now the most expensive room, rented at $450 a night. And the boathouse? They had labeled it on the website as owner's private quarters, do not disturb. They had literally turned my parents into staff quarters in the home I bought for them. I took photos of everything: the guest book, the laminated rules on the counter, the booking calendar showing they were booked solid for weeks. I even found the professional welcome packet that included instructions for guests to avoid the boathouse so they wouldn't disturb the help. Every detail felt like a knife. But the most painful discovery came when I checked the financials. Thousands of dollars had already flowed through the rental. Yet Kyle had still asked me for a little extra help with the house expenses while I was overseas. The money was coming in, but it wasn't going toward the house. It was disappearing somewhere else. I sat in my rental car in the dark driveway that night, staring at the house I owned but no longer felt welcome in, and I whispered to myself, "They have no idea who they're dealing with." The next morning, while my parents ate breakfast at the motel, I went into full mission planning mode. I didn't tell them the full extent of what I had discovered yet. I wanted to protect them from the worst of it until I had real answers. I started with the obvious. Screenshots of the entire booking listing, including the calendar showing weeks of reservations, the high nightly rate, and the photos of my house staged like a luxury resort. I saved every review guests had left. Then I photographed the laminated instruction card that referred to the boathouse as staff quarters. But I needed more. I pulled the utility records and compared them to the booking calendar. The numbers didn't lie. Hundreds of dollars in extra usage that matched perfectly with the nights the house was rented. I also found several large cash deposits into an account linked to Kyle's brother. The paper trail was starting to form. I installed a small legal security camera in a discreet location outside, pointed at the driveway and porch. I wanted timestamps. I wanted proof of who was coming and going. Every piece of evidence I gathered was done carefully, methodically, and completely legally. I knew that if this went to court, every detail would matter. Later that afternoon, I met with Paula, a sharp real estate and landlord-tenant attorney in the nearby town. I laid the deed on her desk first, my name alone, clear as day. She nodded slowly, then gave me the reality check I needed. "You own it," she said. "But because they've been living there for over a month, you can't just change the locks. We have to do this the right way, through the court. Forcible entry and detainer. It takes time, but it's bulletproof." She also noticed the short-term rental angle immediately. "That gives us extra leverage. This area requires permits and lodging taxes. If they don't have them, we can bring in code enforcement." I left her office with a clear plan and a folder that was already growing thicker. Every document, every photo, every timestamp. That night, I sat with my parents in the motel. Dad quietly handed me the wrapped wind chimes he had kept safe. His hands were still shaking. "I didn't want to cause trouble," he whispered. I took his hands in mine and said, "Dad, I make the trouble when it's necessary, and this time, it's necessary." I was no longer just angry, I was focused. I had spent 12 years learning how to move mountains quietly and effectively. Now I was going to use every single lesson. The meeting with Paula became the turning point. She was exactly the kind of lawyer I needed, experienced, no nonsense, and calm under pressure. After reviewing everything I had gathered, she laid out the battlefield clearly. In Minnesota, once people have established residency, even without a formal lease, you can't just evict them yourself. That's considered self-help, and it can backfire badly. We file a forcible entry and detainer action. It takes a few weeks, but when the judge signs the order, it's ironclad. She paused and looked at me over her reading glasses. "But here's the part that helps us. They're running an unlicensed short-term rental in a residential area. That violates county code. We can file a complaint with code enforcement. They can issue a cease and desist order and pursue unpaid lodging taxes. And the booking platform? They have strict policies against non-owners listing properties. One formal complaint with your deed attached could get the listing taken down immediately." I felt a quiet sense of power settle over me. This wasn't going to be a screaming match. This was going to be a strategic campaign. I asked Paula the question that had been burning in my mind. "What about Kyle? He's my husband." She gave me a direct look. "The deed is solely in your name, and the funds are traceable to your separate savings and military pay. That gives you strong standing. Any marital claim would be handled in divorce court later, not here." Divorce. The word landed heavy, but it didn't surprise me. The betrayal ran too deep. I left Paula's office with a complete action plan. We prepared the formal notice to vacate. I gathered more evidence. Bank statements showing large unexplained transfers, screenshots of messages where Kyle had asked for money while the rental income was flowing. Every step I took was quiet, precise, and documented. That evening, Kyle showed up at the motel. He looked exhausted, defeated. Under the buzzing parking lot light, he finally admitted parts of the truth. His business had collapsed. He was deep in debt. The rental money had been his way out. For one moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then he said the words that killed whatever was left of my compassion. "Can't you just let it go? It's basically marital property anyway." That was the moment any remaining softness disappeared. I looked at the man I had once loved and said calmly, "I filed the paperwork today." He had chosen his side. Now I was choosing mine. The full truth came out slowly over the next few days, like poison leaking from a cracked container. Kyle's contracting business hadn't just struggled, it had been failing for nearly 2 years. He had hidden it from me by taking out high-interest loans, borrowing from family, and using credit cards. When I bought the Lakeside house, something in him broke. He saw it as proof that I didn't need him, that I could provide for my parents what he couldn't provide for his own mother. Diane and his brother had come up with the rental idea as a temporary solution. They told Kyle it was just until he got back on his feet. But once the money started coming in, sometimes over $1,000 in a single weekend, it became addictive. They upgraded the listing, bought better linens, printed professional materials. They even started telling guests it was a family-owned boutique retreat. All while my parents slept in the boathouse. The worst part wasn't just the money. It was the disrespect. They had looked at the home I had sacrificed for and decided my parents didn't deserve to live in it. They treated Mom and Dad like hired help who should be grateful for the opportunity. I discovered that over $28,000 had already passed through the rental account. Most of it had gone toward Kyle's secret debts. He had even used some of it to pay for Diane's new furniture. When I confronted him with the numbers, he didn't deny it. He just kept repeating how humiliated he felt that his wife was more successful, how his mother deserved better, how I was choosing my parents over him. I looked at him and said something I'll never regret. "I'm not choosing them over you. I'm choosing basic human decency. You let your family put my elderly parents in a boathouse and charge strangers to sleep in the bedroom I bought for them. There is no coming back from that." That conversation ended any hope of reconciliation. Meanwhile, the evidence folder grew thicker. I had bank statements, booking records, text messages, utility logs, and photos. Paula said we had more than enough for both the eviction case and a potential financial claim. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in justice. And I was willing to wait for it. With everything documented, I focused on timing. The golden anniversary party, the one we had planned for over a year, was scheduled for that Saturday. Both sides of the family would be there, neighbors, even some of the current guests. It was the perfect stage. I could have canceled it. Instead, I kept the date. Paula delivered the formal notices to vacate midweek. Diane tore hers up dramatically. Kyle's brother laughed and said they were fully booked. They still believed I would fold like I always had before. They had no idea I had already opened 3 fronts at once. The court eviction filing was moving forward. The county code enforcement complaint was filed with all evidence attached. The booking platform had received my formal ownership dispute with the deed attached. One by one, the pieces began falling into place. The platform removed the listing on Friday afternoon. All upcoming reservations were canceled and payouts frozen. Code enforcement posted an official cease and desist notice on the front door that evening. I spent Friday night going over the plan with Paula one last time. She reminded me, "Don't give them a speech, let the papers speak. Stay calm. Calm makes them panic." That night, I laid out my uniform for the next day, not to intimidate them, but to remind myself who I was. I sat with my parents and gave Dad the challenge coin I had carried through every deployment. "Hold on to this for me until tomorrow," I told him. "It's never let me down." He held it like it was made of gold. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, the kind of perfect lakeside day my mother had dreamed about for decades. I drove my parents over with their belongings still packed in the truck, because I intended for them to unpack them that same afternoon. The yard was already filling with guests. Diane was playing hostess like the house belonged to her. The cease and desist notice was still taped to the front door behind her. I walked up in uniform, calm and steady. The reckoning had arrived. The yard went quiet as I approached. Heads turned, conversations faded. Diane was the last to notice. When she finally saw me, her practiced smile faltered. I walked straight to my mother, kissed her cheek, and stood beside her. I poured myself a glass of water and waited. The silence grew heavier. Diane couldn't stand it. She walked over with her wine glass, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Well, look who decided to show up and ruin her own parents' anniversary party. I set the glass down slowly. From the folder under my arm, I took out the documents one by one and laid them flat on the table where everyone could see. The deed with only my name. The court filing stamp. The county cease and desist notice. The email from the booking platform confirming the listing had been removed due to ownership dispute. Then I looked at Diane and said in the calmest voice I could manage, "I'm not here to make a scene, I don't need to." I let the silence do its work for a few seconds before continuing. "I'm calm, that should worry you." Diane's face went red. She started shouting about how it was family property and how they had made it work. The more she raised her voice, the quieter the yard became. I pointed to the deed. "There is one name on the title. It's mine. I bought this house with 12 years of my own money for my parents, not for you." Then Carol, one of the guests who had been staying there, stood up from the porch steps and spoke clearly. "My husband and I paid over $2,000 to stay here this week. We had no idea the people renting it didn't own it." That was the final blow. Diane looked around for support and found none. Kyle stood frozen in the middle of the yard, belonging to no one. His brother had already started loading things into his car. I looked at Diane one last time. "You have until 5 o'clock, or the sheriff will enforce the order. The choice is yours." By 4:30 they were gone. Diane was the last to leave. She walked past me with wet eyes but no apology. Kyle remained standing in the yard even after his mother's car disappeared down the driveway. I stepped onto the porch, reached up, and tore down the laminated welcome sign. I ripped it in half and let the pieces fall. The house was finally quiet. The right kind of quiet. We unloaded the truck before sunset. Mom walked into her kitchen, turned slowly in the center of the room, and then reached under the sink for a rag and her favorite lemon oil. Within an hour, the whole downstairs smelled like home again, like care, like love, like the childhood I remembered. Dad carried the brass wind chimes out to the porch with both hands. He hung them back on the hook where they belonged. The evening breeze picked up and they sang softly over the water. Mom stepped outside, closed her eyes and listened, exactly the way I had pictured it for 12 years. I gave Dad the challenge coin to keep. "You held the line with me," I told him. "It's yours now." He didn't argue. He just closed his hand around it and looked out at the lake with peaceful eyes. That evening, the house finally felt like it belonged to the right people. There was one last difficult conversation. The next morning, Kyle asked to meet me on the bluff away from the house. He spoke about his debt, about feeling humiliated, about wanting another chance. For a moment, I remembered the man I had married. But then I remembered my mother crying on the porch, my father shaking hands, the boathouse labeled as staff quarters. I looked at him and said, "I'll help you find a way to handle your debt as one human to another. But we're done. You let your family put my parents in a boathouse. That is a line I will never cross again." He accused me of choosing them over him. I told him the truth. I'm choosing respect. I'm choosing peace. And I'm choosing to never let anyone make my parents feel small again. That was the end of our marriage. In the weeks that followed, the house slowly transformed back into a home. Mom's lemon oil scent filled every corner. Dad's wind chimes sang with the breeze every evening. They woke up to the sound of water, just like she had dreamed when I was a little girl. I filed for divorce. The house stayed with my parents. It had always been meant for them. Kyle will have to face his financial consequences on his own. Looking back, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about boundaries. I had spent years being the useful one, the fixer, the provider, the strong one who never complained. People took advantage of that. They assumed I would always absorb the pain and keep carrying everyone else. But a home isn't just walls and a roof. It's the place where your parents should feel safe and respected. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is put your name on the deed and protect what matters most. If you've ever been taken for granted by the people who were supposed to love you, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to draw the line. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to stop being useful and start being respected. Type the word boundaries in the comments if this story spoke to you. Let me know which part hit you the hardest. Thank you for sitting with me through this. If you're going through something similar right now, know that you're not alone. Stay calm, stay strategic, and never be afraid to protect what you've worked so hard to build. This is Elena Voss, signing off. I'll see you in the next story.